Hold it! Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill them! Kill them both! Now, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
Incredible astrologer in her own right, a forensic astrologer, a true crime investigator, an author, and a fellow occult reject. Hey, BD, what's up?
Hey, Jen, thanks for having me on today.
No, I really appreciate it. And we did have, we'll just acknowledge that I had already planned for your episode and we had a little technical difficulty, but you very graciously agreed to retool and come back and represent what you did. And you did a great job the first time, but I actually have utmost confidence in this time because I think you've been looking into stuff that especially my audience will find very interesting. So introduce yourself, BD, and promote all your work, which will be of course in the show notes, and I'll link all your at least the last 2 Occult Reject episodes that you were on, and then your End of Days episode, and because we always I love Dan, so we'll shout out that show, of course.
Yo, thank you. Yeah, I had a great time doing Dan's show last week. It was really interesting. Where do I begin? Okay, I guess I would call myself a true crime occultist. I've always been interested in true crime and the occult, that meaning the unseen. I was always fascinated by psychology, the paranormal. I got into astrology in my mid-20s, and that became a passion all the way to this present day. And I started working with a branch of astrology that was not that well developed in the literature. And in the 20 teens, it dawned on me, well, I've done a lot of research into this. I should write books about it. There are not available books out there, not that many anyway. And I didn't consider myself a master at it, but I did know enough that I felt I could teach other astrologers what a wonderful tool forensic astrology could be, because I had been studying and investigating crimes and applying astrological techniques and coming up with some really great information. So I wrote my first book in 2012. It's called Forensics by the Stars. And then I followed it up a few years later with a more developed, researched book into ancient astrological techniques that helped me with crime studies. And that one's called Exploring Forensic Astrology. And then I took a huge detour in 2020 during the pandemic, and I decided to investigate a mass murder that I was very familiar with because I remembered it as a child, and it had always really upset me to think about it. And so I spent 3 years collecting all kinds of data and research on the mass murder of 8 student nurses in Chicago in 1966. And that book came out. Actually, I'm really excited that yesterday is the first anniversary of the issuance of that book. It came out May 31st, 2023. I cannot believe the year I've had since that book came out. But anyway, that's the name of that book is Richard Speck and the 8 Nurses Deconstructing a Mass Murder. And that has nothing to do with occult astrology or any of the paranormal stuff I usually work with. That was straight left brain evidentiary studies, common sense and critical thinking going into that book. But while I was working on that research, I did come up with a number of occult features of the crime, especially in the astrology, the numerology, the other symbols that were in plain sight of that crime. And so by the end of last summer, I wrote another book called Desperate Rights, Richard Speck, and the Occult Symbolism. Now, I'm messing up the title already because there's so many. Anyway, it's called Desperate Rights, and it's on Amazon. And
I'll
then
make sure to include the link.
Okay, that's fine. You know what it is? It's Desperate Rights, Astrology, and the Occult in the Richard Speck case. That's what it is. I always have long titles. And they encourage you to put a colon and then have a subtitle, and then they get really long. So forgive me for not remembering the title of my own book for a second. Then I decided to write my memoirs because I started doing a life review of how did I get to this stage where I'm doing forensic astrology. I was a paralegal by trade for many years, worked in law firms in New York City and for large corporations in New Jersey where I live. And I was thinking of how unusual my day and night lives were and how disparate, and how did I finally unify them by just going into what I'm doing now. So that memoir is called Anywhere But Here, Confessions of a Pisces Moon, which is where my moon sign, and I describe how the qualities of a Pisces moon affected a lot of decisions I made in my life, which has been, not to brag, but it's been really interesting, adventuresome, and unexpected. I've had a lot of odd things happen in my life. I always say that I'm into high strangeness, but I think high strangeness finds me. I don't look for high strangeness. It falls in my lap, and that's why I study what I study, because it seems to just come naturally to me. So those are my books, and based on the occult book on the Richard Speck case, I was contacted by Nick at Occult Rejects to discuss the book on his show. And that was back in October, about 6-7 months ago. Since then, I've done many shows with Occult Rejects. They were always my favorite channel. I would never have dreamed I would have been on that channel now as a participating, team member. But, like I said, things just fall my way, and that worked out. They are the most fantastic people to work with. I love doing the work. We've done a number of really good podcasts and have some really good ones lined up in the future. So I guess that brings me to present day.
I never thought of myself as being able to go on tour, Occult Rejects, but because I listened to it so extensively, I've listened to hundreds of episodes, and I will say that you have done as well incredible episodes. You, JJ, Lisa, and Nick, really extensive, real world, real time, true crime research at using all the tools that you bring. JJ's an incredible deep researcher. Nick's great at all the occult stuff. Lisa brings her scientific knowledge, and you bring the astrological knowledge. I love all your episodes. I'm a fan already, and for me, it was exactly the same. I was really lucky that I got asked to be part of the mini series that I've done, and it's been an incredible experience. So I relate to you in that way, that you were a fan and then became someone who is on the show. So, present day, you have an incredible life story as well, with studying at the Edward Casey Institute and acupuncture background, and you've gone into this on End of Days. You have an incredible life arc, and strangeness does find people. The synchronicities happen when you're not looking for them. It is when everything aligns properly. So, BD, I know that you were very interested in doing film, but I didn't know this actually, that you had done a lot of research into the astrology of celebrities, but you combine it, very interestingly, bloodline research.
I got interested in the bloodlines fairly recently in comparison to my other interests, because I was learning how connected it is to what we call conspiracy theory, which is actually what I think is really what happens behind the scenes. And the bloodlines connect to the group that we call the Illuminati, which is, it's a mishmash group of many, many people, but basically boils down to people in high positions of authority, royalty, royal families, leaders of government, and governors, anybody that made it to the top, corporate leaders, for example. There are bloodlines that can be traced back. I think that I've learned this, of course, through many podcasts that I have listened to in the past few years. There's also a really interesting reference, I think it's only available on ebook now, called Bloodlines of the Illuminati by Fritz Springmeier. And that's a real interesting book that actually lays out the genealogy of the 13 families. There are supposedly 13, I'd say, initial bloodline names that you can trace most activity back to. But anyway, I started looking at bloodlines in relation to crime, in relation to political events, crisis, catastrophes, stuff like that. Any people involved in that. There are certain websites where you can find that information that I refer to, but unfortunately, as you would expect, a lot of it is now getting scrubbed, or it's not available, or you can't find it. Because, once we start catching on to the activities of people who pull these sort of events around the world, they start to catch on to the fact that we're catching on. So it's like a constant chase. The stuff becomes unavailable or hard to find. But anyway, so I did talk a little bit on Daniel's show. The first show I did with Daniel a couple months ago talked about bloodlines, and then he asked me back to talk about it, which was about a little over a week ago. And then somehow, I think corresponding with you, we got around to, you said, what if you looked into Lana Del Rey? I was laughing because I'm so retro when it comes to music. I'm very retro. My two passions, music and film, go back to, my favorite film genre is film noir, which is 1940s. I haven't been inside a movie theater for over 10 years. I'm not interested in current film. Contemporary music, basically, to me, is kind of a turn off. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but I'm just telling you where I'm at. I'm very retro with music and the arts, and so I didn't know who Lana Del Rey was. I heard of her. I knew she was a celebrity, but I didn't really know if she sang, acted, did a reality show. I didn't know anything about her. So I thought, well, this is interesting. Go ahead.
Shout out to DJ Poolhouse, because he is really obsessed. Him and Q, who both of them have been on my show. They love Lana, and she's very alt-right coded. I'm sure this is way beyond like your scope of knowledge. I didn't know who she was either. I don't really watch Western movies. I only watch Asian things. Music-wise, very eclectic. I like what I like, and it's not contemporary music. This is going to be an adventure, and I'm really excited for where you're going to take us.
I am too, because like I said, High Strangeness falls in my lap, and Lana dropped me a huge gift. With looking at her, I decided to look at her birth chart. First, I looked for her bloodlines, and right off the bat, got a huge clue, because Lana is not Lana Del Rey. Lana Del Rey was born Elizabeth Woolridge Grant. Okay, June 1985. I've got her chart right in front of me here. And her chart is absolutely mind-blowing. So I thought, oh boy, this is perfect. This is just the kind of launch point that I want to start at. It's fascinating. Everything that connects to her birth chart is in her name. And I'm talking about both names. Elizabeth Woolridge Grant. Okay, if you go to a website called thepeerage.com, peerage meaning ancestry of nobility in Britain specifically, you're going to find the name Grant is very common, and iterations of the name Grant, like Grant House or Grantham, which was in the name of the Lord in Downton Abbey with Lord Grantham. There's a lot of iterations of Grant. It is a name coming down for centuries in the nobility. Now, I can't state for a fact that her family specifically came from the bloodline, but that bloodline exists and it goes way back. At some point, it may have connected, and I will talk a little bit about her parentage here in this country. But anyway, you have Grant, you have Woolridge, another name of nobility. Elizabeth is the name of two queens, Elizabeth I and Elizabeth II. So, oh wow, even if I can't find anything on records-wise, data-wise, there is such a connection to nobility in her birth name. And I understand when she first started out, I think she was still a late teenager, her first records or musical ventures were under the name Lizzie Grant. Okay, and she explained that she changed her name to Lana Del Rey because she was hanging out and clubbing a lot in Miami and speaking Spanish with a lot of her Latino friends. And so she just picked Lana Del Rey. Well, I'm telling you, I don't know if she picked it out of the clear blue sky, but that name, Lana Del Rey, connects to her birth chart in ways that was giving me, a seasoned occultist, the creeps. I mean, it was just phenomenal. I mean, and nothing's by accident and nothing's by coincidence. And this is certainly a brilliant example of that rule. So where do I want to go with that? I want to start, I guess, with, as I said, I couldn't find much on the parentage, but her father is very active in the social media. His name is Robert England Grant Jr. And he has an interesting background. He's a domain entrepreneur. He works with domain names, which can be very, very lucrative business if you know what you're doing. Prior to that, now the family, I should add, is from New York City. That's where she was born. She went to Fordham University in the Bronx and majored in philosophy. We're going to see that she's a very, very deep thinking lady. So her father was, before going into domain investments, he was a copywriter for a very high-powered advertising agency called the Gray Group, which is interesting.
Yeah,
Copywriting and advertising, when you do it really well, you are dabbling in neuro-linguistic programming. You're dabbling in word magic, as I call it.
100%.
You're dabbling in what they gave this nice euphemism to subtle mind control effects of advertising. They call it persuasion engineering. Does that sound awful? It's how somebody's driving a car and your brain is in the motor. It's engineering you into a certain persuasion of thinking. So her father being a copywriter, I found quite fascinating. Of course, he's not doing that anymore. But
I just want to interrupt you. I apologize. I think it's really interesting for the audience to point out how much of this chaos magic comes out of the advertising world, especially in the early 90s. Peter Carroll and Phil Hines and all of their books on chaos magic, it really comes at this nexus point between the anti-globalization leftist, what they call culture jamming, where they would post stickers and anti-New World Order messaging. And a lot of those guys who started that movement have their background in advertising, in copywriting. So I just think that there's a very interesting nexus point, which you referenced and said that it is dabbling in word magic, because words can have many, many layers of meanings, maybe the occulted layers beneath what is there intentionally. And to reference Lana's name change, I personally, I would change my name to have a specific numerological value. 100%, no question. Now, would I ever admit to it? No, I would never admit to it, but I would definitely do that. So I'm saying that as someone who knows what they're doing, they're not picking something out of random. It always has a meaning.
No,
Sorry.
it definitely does. Yeah.
I'm sorry, BD. I didn't mean to derail you.
Oh, no problem. No, you didn't at all. I was just, it's actually, advertising is a mind control event. 100%. And it just, and even some of the terms they use to describe it to me were always very offensive. Well, for example, guerrilla marketing, not Gorilla, but Guerilla, guerrilla marketing. Who wants to think that you're a bunch of mercenary soldiers are after your psyche to make you buy something? I mean, it's insane. It's a horrible term, and so is persuasion engineering, by the way. I find them both really offensive.
Very offensive.
But there's levels in marketing that do push buttons and that do attempt to manipulate the collective psyche and convince us that we need something that we don't need. I mean, the pure purpose of advertising is to sell someone a product that they need. But all this other stuff goes into convincing you that there's this, this emptiness in your life, that this product will fill it for you. It's mass manipulation of the collective psyche. And I think it's gone way overboard, not to go into a tangent on advertising, which I have personal pet peeves from here to eternity about advertising. I just really so opposed to it anymore, the way it's done. But anyway, her father was in that business, and interesting that we'll talk when I get to her chart, but I want to sidetrack here with the parents. Her mother also worked at Grey Group. That's, I believe, how the parents met. Now, I don't want to say too much on that account. However, Elizabeth, will say, was raised Roman Catholic in a Scottish family. Grant has a Scottish background. Of course, as I said, it connects to English nobility going back centuries. But she transferred to an Episcopal school at the age of 14 because she said, I had to dry out. At the age of 14, Elizabeth was an alcoholic. So I'm not going to jump into any family situations here, but that's a little alarming. She was an alcoholic at the age of 14, and the chart will reflect that she had some really difficult early years. And that's, I think, contributes to her extreme creativity. She's a phenomenally creative young lady, very, very gifted, very deep person. As for her music, when we decided that we would do this little chat about Lana, I did go and listen to one of her songs on YouTube, and I didn't like it. She has an excellent voice.
Yeah.
She's a contralto, and she's got a great range. But contralto is a kind of unusual but very alluring type of a voice. It's a little deeper than normal voice for a woman anyway. And I didn't like the song, and the way she sang it, she looked and sounded like she was bored.
That's her thing.
And the lack of affect, and that to me is antithetical to music. Of course, you can be expressing boredom.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, I'm old school, I'm retro, I still listen to the 70s music all the time. And I don't care for contemporary stuff. I don't like a lot of the stylization of it. I think auto-tune should be illegal. I just don't like all the effects pumped in, all the AI effects pumped into contemporary music. So anyway, that's my rant about that. But Lana, so I believe she changed her name in her late teens, early 20s. And, oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't finish the bloodline. The bloodline does go back. We just talked about her father. Her grandfather, Robert England Grant Sr., was a graduate of Ivy League. He went to Brown and then he went to Harvard Business School in the 1950s. And so the Ivy League back then was a big deal. You had to have a lot of money to get in and you had to have influence. So, and he was a venture capitalist. So this was not some middle-class family from New York.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They were well off, they had money. And whatever happened in the home, Lana was an alcoholic at 14, but she went sober after she went to this Episcopal boarding school. I believe it was a boarding school, and straightened things out for herself, fortunately.
It's a very expensive boarding school.
Yeah, that's true too. And it wasn't even Catholic. She just went because I guess that was the place to get her back on her feet. But so I think that's pretty much the family. Oh yeah, this is an interesting aside that the grandfather worked for. Now I worked in New York City in the 80s, and there was scandals in the investment world were a dime a dozen. They were exploding every day. It was a big deal. There were so many trials. I remember it because I was there, and it affected some of our law firm's clients. But the grandfather worked for Kidder Peabody, investment securities firm, and then they got bought out, and then they ended up being with Payne Weber. And the reason that's interesting is that Payne Weber was on the 101st floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center on 9/11, along with Cantor Fitzgerald, who all got obliterated by the plane that crashed into the North Tower. So that's interesting. They were that level of high finance, and I always felt that 9/11 in some way, with all of the machinations of destruction that were intended to be done and to turn the country into a war-like state against the Middle East, I think a lot of it was destroying financial records, making a huge dent into the financial heart of this country, which the World Trade Center was the financial heart of the country. So her grandfather works for a company that's destroyed on 9/11 in the World Trade. I thought, wow, that's really interesting.
Let
So
me
they go
you,
ahead.
sorry. Yes, I agree with you, and I wonder if you agree with the idea that 9/11 was a Babylon working. Because I personally am of that opinion. I believe that there are other magicians, occultists, whatever, in the world, in the podcasting world, that do also believe that. But I that's what I personally think. I'm putting it on record, and of course, I want to know what you think as well.
Well, I'm in full agreement with you, and I think that it carried across so many levels. It ticked so many boxes, as these major catastrophic events always tend to do. I mean, on a cultural, social level, on a political level, it ticked all the boxes of major chaos and bringing about a desired result. So, yeah, I think those things start with that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
They
mm-hmm.
start with that intent, in the chaotic intent, and they just trickle down to our everyday living, to where we're afraid when we see a Muslim person or what have you. It all starts with that first instinct in the ethers, which is the evil. I will say, to
Mm-hmm.
carry out an evil intention and go cascading through all these levels of society and the collective consciousness, and destroying institutions and beliefs. Yeah, it all starts up there. I fully agree with you.
Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to derail. The thing is, with my show, that's different than maybe the other shows you've been on, especially with Nick or even with Dan, is that mine is still, we're still looking at the entry level of metaphysics, but not necessarily through a hermeneutic or a magical system, other than the fact that I'm a tantric Buddhist. But I'm just introducing the concepts, the layers, but I'm using the popular culture. It's interesting and important to introduce these deeper things and then build their body of knowledge around these events as occult workings, rather than me just say, yeah, it's an occult working, this is this. But I would just rather introduce the idea.
No, I appreciate your stand on that, because I personally do not see time or history as linear. I see it as cyclical, and nothing happens that hasn't already happened a long
100%.
time ago. I mean, the destruction of temples in Babylon, the towers. These are all reruns. This is
Hmm.
nothing new. These people are not, innovative in any sense of the word. This is recycled trauma from millennia ago, and they just play it out. They're like different costumes and different characters and different stages and props. It's the same stuff. It's just a cycle of the willful destruction of something to achieve a desired goal. That's what it is. It's just
Yeah.
in different masks, different disguises. That's why I think things are cyclical. They're not going along a historical line where 1850s over here and then 1910 is ahead of it. It's not like that. I think about things like that a lot, because that's what draws me to symbolism, is you've seen it already. If you know to look for the signs, you can identify, you can see it already. And if you know something, a little bit about numbers and things like symbols, shapes, animal totems, and stuff like that, you can go a long way to understanding. It just takes a little bit of curiosity and critical thinking to get interested in it.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly that we live in a cyclical system. We live in the Leela, the divine play. It's happening every day. It's not in order. And the way that they play it out on Earth in their grand plays, their great games, it is not, it's not in order. It's chaotic. And sometimes it's intentionally chaotic because that's the grammar of their spell, if you want to call it that. Or sometimes it's chaotic because I think they don't know the correct order in which to sort of perform the next ritual. So I think you're right. They try and eminentize heaven by performing these plays or these public rituals, but it's usually quite weak, in my opinion. People have to really believe it.
Yeah,
For everybody has to buy in, and the less people that buy in, the less powerful it is. That's my thinking.
right. And that's all the more reason to give them the impetus to change up. And we're going to go this way now. We're going to go to zig instead of zagging, because they're going to figure it out. Which is, I think, the power of what you and I and Occult Rejects and all the other fellow podcasters out there that are listening right now. That's the power that we have to shape thought going forward. Is
100%.
to teach each other, inform each other. That's why I wrote my books. I didn't write my books because I thought I was an expert. I wrote them because I thought people need to know this. I knew enough to write the books. That was all I needed to know. And when I find out something like this, I want to talk about it. I want to write about it. I want to share the word because people need to know. And I have one pet peeve about this whole chaos thing. If you don't mind me venting for
Absolutely.
a minute.
All right. No, it's your
They
show.
have all this ordine ab chaos stuff, order from chaos, as if that's something we desire, order and structure and tranquility from chaos. We need to be rescued from chaos. First of all, what chaos are you talking about? That, in my view, the universe is divinely ordained. The sun goes around its axis and it changes signs every 30 days or so. The moon changes, it goes through one complete cycle every 28 days. Mercury circles the sun once every 88 days. You can track the movements of the stars and make predictions for space travel based on the reliability of the motion of these bodies. Now, how can you say that this is chaos? They're bringing order from chaos when they're claiming to want to bring order from chaos. Chaos is what they create.
Yes.
We have an orderly universe. It's already there. We know the sun's going to rise in the morning. We know we're going to have a full moon. We know when we're going to have an eclipse. We know when we're going to see a comet. And we know how infrequently that is, and we could still predict it. So where is chaos? We have order. These, whatever you want to call, I want to call them people sometimes. I call them maniacs. And I refuse to use the word elite because elite to me is a compliment. There is nothing elite about these people. They are producing chaos, confusion, disorientation, post-traumatic stress syndrome. They're creating it under the guise of saying we bring order from chaos. No, you're taking chaos and creating it, taking order rather, and creating chaos from it, or trying to convince us through magic, through word magic, whatever, through persuasion engineering, whatever you want to call NLP. You're trying to convince us you're going to make that right. You're going to set things right. You're going to put things in order. Oh no, things are already in order and you're messing it up. So that's my pet peeve about order from chaos. Every time I hear that, I will see, I'll look at occult things or occult references, and I see that and I just grit my teeth. It's not the way it really is. However, that's just my personal opinion, and for
No,
what it's worth.
I perennial things, the sun and the moon, Mercury and Venus. We know those things exist in a fundamentally mappable way.
Mhm.
So why apply our will or magic? I call them the dark triad or the archons. I haven't
Right.
decided. I like both. But why apply will or effort or magic to things that are of God and of nature? That's the hubris, right? They believe that they are the masters of the universe, and in some ways, yes, you could say that, in not that they are, but they are practicing theurgy or black magic or whatever that is, sorcery, and they are doing something, but they can really only affect the lower worlds. This is a very fundamental idea in medieval Kabbalah, in Tantra, in all sorts of religions, and it confuses me as to why they believe, because obviously something happened in 1947, obviously the Babylon working with Parsons. I think that did change our fundamental realities. Magic became a lot less compartmentalized within the tree of religion. It became this free for all, and then they realize that they can start tapping into this without the exterior densities, without the ritual performance of the church or a black mass, or which is just an inversion, right? They don't need any of that. They can just do their own sort of Babylon rituals of their own making, devise and design. I don't know. I feel they have been tapping into something that is chaos, and that makes sense for a lot of grimoires, contemporary grimoires that
Mhm.
have been published since the 60s, even to now, that there is this what they call Babylonian current or anti-cosmic Gnosticism.
Mhm.
And so I agree with you. They worship this idea of Eris. I've read some of these grimoires, and they're meant to be very scary and transgressive. And
Mhm.
I know from Tantra is very scary, it's very transgressive appearing. But once you sort of understand, it's really not. It's really a hermeneutic to make you understand all the different sins, all the different fears, all the different conditions of bullshit that you've attuned yourself to, and cut through all of that. I'm in the conceptual reality camp where a lot of people who are approaching the magical material, they're looking at it for the transgressive things, whereas I don't, because I don't get hung up on that. But
Mhm.
I also know that they do worship Eris. They do worship chaos of the primordial soup, but it has pre-formation. So they're very angry at God, or they think they are God, or they think they can be God. And obviously Dana, as you know from Rotting Jewels, has done a lot with the process theology. And I just think there's a lot similar to what they seem to believe, the four quadrants of the process theology.
No, that's really interesting to know. I think I tend to have what I think is an overly simplistic view of a lot of things because I just sort of boil them down to their essence, and I don't want to get caught up in the trappings of this school or this level or this this faction, or I just try to look at things as basic as possible, keeping things simple. So if I sound overly simplistic, that's because I really am. that's
I don't think you are. I just think
that's why the way no that's the way I look at things. I try to just boil things down to their essence and take it from there.
100%. I probably over intellectualized.
No, no, you didn't at all. Not at all. Just saying.
Anyways, BD, why don't sorry, I sort of derailed us, but before
No,
we discussed chaos, we were discussing the Twin Towers. So Lana's father or grandfather worked at the Twin Towers at the firm that was hit. Is that correct? Is that where
he
we were?
worked. Yes, he worked for Payne Weber. I don't know that he was still working when that happened, but he did. That was his company, his firm that he worked for. He was an investment banker, and of course they went down with the North Tower and the other big investment firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, that was on that same floor. So that was her grandfather, and that is I couldn't get further back in her lineage. But as I said, they were a Roman Catholic family of Scottish descent, and those names Woolridge and Grant go way back into the nobility. And her name Elizabeth of the two queens of England is also a suggestion of nobility. So then I'm thinking, well, why Lana Del Rey? You have a very wasp name. You have three wasp names in your name, and you go to Lana Del Rey. So that fascinated me. I had to know more about that. And of course, then I found her birth information and did her birth horoscope, which completely nails the significance of Lana Del Rey to Elizabeth Woolridge Grant. It blew my mind. And like I said, I don't look for this stuff, but it finds me. So anyway, I'll talk about that now. Lana Del Rey, translated from the Spanish, literally means wool of the king. So that's entertaining to think about. The king, now you're connecting to nobility, and her name is the name, Elizabeth is the name of two queens. So you're getting a connection that way, energetically. I always think of names as having an energetic imprint. They are not random. Names have a vibration, they help to identify us. We identify with them after a certain period of growth. And so, what does Lana Del Rey talk about? Fascinating, because in her birth chart, there are three major components. We call them the major lights or the major luminaries. That would be the sun, the moon, and the ascendant. The ascendant being the sign that was rising on the horizon at the moment of your birth. So Lana is born June 21st. Oh, she got a birthday coming up. 1985. That makes her a Cancer. Her sun is in the zodiac sign Cancer, and she's born on the solstice, the summer solstice, June 21st.
Yes, I was just thinking
which
that.
is, yeah, and to go further a little bit into that, at the moment she was born, the sun had just entered the sign of Cancer. She was born literally on the day, the moment of the solstice. The sun is at 0 degrees, 23 minutes. Now, 23 minutes of arc passes quickly. So the sun had just popped into Cancer. Lana just pops out of her mother. That's very significant. We call it the 0 degree. Her life had such impetus to enter at that moment. And what it meant in Cancer was one of her main motivations was to find security and stability in the world. Cancers crave that. It doesn't mean they have it. Everybody hears Cancer wants a safe family. They're the sign of the family and the ancestry and stability and nurturing and protection. That's what they're looking for. It doesn't mean they have it. It's what's driving them and their life trajectory. So she's 0, just came in, the sun just came into Cancer. That's her dominating, driving life force. And it's a very intense one because it's in the 8th house of her chart. And it's a water sign. She's got a ton of water in this birth horoscope. She's got 3 planets in Cancer. She's got Scorpio rising and Saturn rising in Scorpio. And I'll definitely talk about that. And that's a lot of water. Very, very sensitive, very psychically attuned. Somebody really who could really be in the depths of everything. I mean, this woman's soul is at the depth of the ocean. She's got powerful feeling, tremendous creative drive. She's also suffered a lot of misery. The water signs are very, very sensitive, and they don't have stable boundaries. So she comes into this life seeking protection and security. And I thought that was interesting because wool of the king, wool protects us. Wool is a covering, it's a protective clothing. Wool is waterproof. She's full of water signs, and wool is waterproof. Wool is something that keeps you warm. The water signs are very cold. The water element in astrology relates to the north, where it's very cold. So she's looking for safety and comfort, wool of the king, and wool is in her middle name, Woolridge, wool of the king. So the wool was a fabric that was used throughout antiquity, and it wasn't royal, it was for everybody. Poor people used wool, which was, of course, shorn from sheep. The wealthy and royalty also wore wool, but of course for them, it had to be more ornamental. It was colorful. They dyed it many different hues of shades of color. So wool is for everyone. It's not a royal fabric. But wool is protective, keeps you warm from the cold, and she's got so much cold in her elements in this chart. So wool of the king, let's go further and look at the other luminary, which is the moon. The moon is in the sign of Leo. Lana needs to shine. The sign Leo is predominant in show business with celebrities, with actors, singers, people on stage. They want to be up there. They want adulation. They want attention for their work. They're extremely creative people. They're very ego-driven people. So her moon is telling you her emotions have this creative drive to be accepted and acknowledged on a grand scale. Now, what does Leo rule? Leo rules royalty. It's a sign of the lion. The sun rules the sign Leo. So we look at her sun and her moon. The sun is in the sign that the moon rules, Cancer. The moon is in the sign ruled by the sun, which is Leo. So sun and moon, her ego and her emotions are really aligned with this drive to be prominent and to be creative, but to feel safe within that structure. That's a hard thing with show business. So you have the sense of the sun being royalty and the moon's taking its place. Wool of the king. You have the king in there, and that's her moon is in the sign of the king. So that's connecting her birth time with Lana Del Rey, very strongly imprinted on it. Now, I didn't even get to ascendant yet. The ascendant, or the rising sign, is Scorpio. Scorpio, that gives her that, Scorpio rising, be very sexy, very appealing. There's something mysterious about them. There's a charm that exudes from them. It's physical, It's an emotional thing. They can be very manipulative. They can use these attributes to manipulate other people sexually, intellectually, in a myriad of ways. You may be interested to know that in her first house, Ketu is rising. You have Ratu Ketu. Ketu is rising in Scorpio. What also is rising in the first house, which really I thought was kind of tragic, is she has Saturn in Scorpio retrograde in the first house. That is telling me, that is reinforcing that sun. She's coming in at the moment to be rescued, to be protected. This life has a major trajectory that she needs to fulfill. The reason being, Saturn rising in Scorpio's retrograde, her last lifetime ended abruptly, violently, and tragically. Something happened that cut her last lifetime off short in a very brutal way. And she had the impetus to come back and rectify what happened then. And it looks pretty ugly. It looks like it was a violent death, could have been a murder. But I have seen this with Saturn rising people in retrograde in the first house. They rushed back into incarnation because what went wrong in their previous life, it ended so soon and so abruptly because of partially of their own karma. This is a horoscope laced with heavy duty karmic influence. We all are subjected to karma, but this one is saying, do or die karma for Lana. I mean, it is heavily laced in her chart. She's been given the gifts and the aptitude of creativity to resolve a lot of these underpinning emotions and possibly unconscious memories of her past life, which was so traumatic in so many ways. But we've already seen that this life has had its own trauma. What drives you to be an alcoholic at the age of 14? That's pretty awful. But so with the Saturn rising, I saw right away that she's got some heavy duty karmic situations that she's trying to resolve in this lifetime.
BD, let me just interrupt you. I apologize. I want to point out that the Ketu in Scorpio, that is very significant for someone who is into magic. It denotes someone who's very, they might not be skilled. Well, usually because Ketu is that smoke of ritual potential, it can be someone who's very skilled in magic, but it's someone who is definitely going to play with it. I apologize again. Please continue.
Oh, no problem. I was going to get to that because with all this water and Scorpio rising, and she's got a 12th house placement, she has dabbled. I believe maybe her last life ended as a result of messing with this the wrong way. Something catastrophic happened to her, and she's coming back trying to fix it on the summer solstice when the season is blossoming into, young adulthood. We're in the part of the year where you're already established to a point now, you're a young adult, you get a chance to do it over again, make the right decisions and judgments. Again, going back to Lana Del Rey, Scorpio rising is ruled by the planet Mars. Mars rules sheep, which is the where we get wool from. And Mars is prominently placed with her sun in the 8th house. And this is also telling me that she does work with the occult. She's very, very connected on an energetic and an emotional level to the occult. And I'll tell you a little story in a minute about that. But yeah, she's already familiar with it. She already knows about it. She uses it. I believe many performers utilize it. Sometimes they're not even conscious of that, using certain, things. It's show business is laced with that. That's how those people get through it. That's how they get into it and they get through it. That would be a good show for a future discussion, but I don't want to digress too much on that right now.
No, you're welcome on as many as you can tolerate.
Oh, okay. No. Yeah, I could just talk forever, so somebody's going to have to cut me off at some point. But anyway, the Saturn in Scorpio, that's a sign of past violence and abuse and tampering with stuff we're not supposed to tamper with. And she's got Pluto in the 12th house. Now, what's real interesting about the 12th house Pluto, which is also in Scorpio, is that right now, transiting Pluto is at going into 2 degrees Aquarius, or I believe it just went retrograde. It was getting close to 2 degrees of Aquarius. That was going to set off a stress aspect to the Pluto in her birth chart, which is at 2 degrees of Scorpio. So I wonder where she's at with the practice right now, because if she is meddling with it with not the most wholesome of intent, something's going to backfire on her. And to now, the story I was referring to is that Lana is now a staunch supporter of President Biden. And I understand that when Trump was elected in 2016, she put a curse on him. She was so upset that he got elected. Now, I don't know how much I can trust what I read online, but that's where I got that information from. She actually put a curse on Donald Trump. So that key, I thought, oh yeah, well, it's in the chart, and here we go. There's actually, if that story is true, it bears out what I'm saying here, but it is definitely in her horoscope that she has the ability to work with it, has the innate understanding of working with it. So what I was getting back to was the wool and the relation to the sheep. And I think of that phrase, the sheep and the wolf in sheep's clothing. And I wonder if that's how, being of a manipulative type of personality, if that's how she has worked her way through certain circumstances in her life and in her business. And interesting to note that Aries and Mars that I'm talking about ruling the sheep also rule the wolf. So you're looking at two faces of the same thing, that she can look vulnerable and look sensitive and look devastated at times, but there's something behind it that is extremely powerful. There's a very powerful drive in this lady, and she's very accomplished at getting what she wants. And she's got, like I said, a ton of emotional depth. We don't know, that's so much power there. Sometimes we don't know how to use our power when so many planets are in the 8th house. She's got 3 of them in the 8th house. And when I talk about crime charts, I'm talking very black and white. The 8th house is the house of murder and death. Now, in natal astrology, we're not so black and white. It's the house of transformation. It's a very intense house. It's not a happy house for planets to be in, but you can become a powerhouse if you learn how to funnel that energy that you get from that house. And I have to add here, with all this in the 8th house, maybe one of the things that drove her to drink so early in life was that she has a deathly fear of death. She has a dreaded fear of death. She talks about it. She's talked about being terrified that everybody she knew and loved growing up was eventually going to die. She could not cope with the truth that everything dies. She's got to by now have learned that death is a transformation. Death is a cycle. I hope she understands that. She's still, only in her 30s. But she was very scared of death. And you have all this death. The death house is so prominent. And the vertex point, which is the point of the existence, is in the 8th house, but it's in Gemini. So her drive is to communicate about that fear. And isn't it interesting? I posted something in Instagram earlier today of I think it was an album cover of hers, Lana Del Rey, Born to Die, one of her early albums, Born to Die. She's obsessed with death, and that's Scorpio rising as well. That is a sign that delves very deeply into things, a very heavily transformative sign. But if it goes off on its own without moral guidance, it can wreak havoc. It can be violent, it can be bloody, it can be gruesome, it can be abusive power, abusive people. So she's got a hell of a powerhouse packed chart here. It's just phenomenal. But the connections to the name, Wool of the King, and the protection that desires, and the suggestion of royalty, and the suggestion of a wolf and a lamb, or rather a sheep, a wolf in sheep's clothing, pretty much describe her as I've understood it. And she's written some really intense music as well. Got Born to Die. She wrote Summertime Madness, something called Ultraviolence. And a lot of the references of her songs, I didn't listen to all these songs, but just the titles fill you in pretty much on where she's at with it. So that chart and the connection to the names just blew me away. I just was not expecting to find that level of cross correspondence between the planet. And I should know better. I've been doing astrology long enough to know these things always connect. They always connect. But to take an invented name and see it in birth where she didn't adopt it for maybe 20 years, till 20 years after she was born, is really, it just fascinates me. That's why I love doing this. I am always surprised by the things that I find, even though they make perfect sense and I know they are real and they are true. They just blow my mind that this is going on in a horoscope. So pretty much, I think that covers what I wanted to talk about. If you wanted to talk more about Lana.
This might be a Threshold saying it's exclusive. Her birth chart, I'm serious. And I know people will listen just for that reason. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. I do want to touch on a little bit, if you are comfortable with, this friendship she has with Taylor Swift, since they are new friends. And it's long suspected that Taylor Swift is some kind of, I don't know, satanic heiress, I guess, of the. She looks a lot like Xena LaVey, I guess, as the meme says. So people think that maybe her mom is related or in somehow connected, allegedly, to Temple of Set, Church of Satan, etc. I thought if you want to touch on that.
Her bloodline, she's a cousin of Jeffrey Dahmer, which I found hysterical. When I was doing the show with Daniel, I crack up every time I think of her being related to Jeffrey Dahmer, but he fits into quite a few celebrity bloodlines. I don't have those notes in front of me, but his name kind of came up more than once, I believe, with Jake Gyllenhaal, the actor. And these people, I'm telling you, if you go back far enough, they're all like in the same network. And so Taylor Swift, so I don't, as I bitched about it on Daniel's show, how tired I am of Taylor Swift cropping up every time I turn my head to look at a screen of something. But I'll just look at Lana's friends. I'm going to look at her 11th house, which describes her friends. Her friends are described. Oh boy, this is funny. Her friends are described by the planet Mercury, people of like mind and similar family, Mercury and Cancer, and it connects to the Saturn. Oh, wow. Yes. That would explain their connection because Mercury's in the 8th house where people are attuned to the psychic realms, occult phenomena. So yeah, her friends are like that. Her friends are connected that way. I don't even have to look up Taylor Swift.
No,
I can just tell you from Lana's chart, her friends are into the same, play in the same sandbox, so to speak.
They mostly all are. I think.
Oh yeah.
Of them that are there innocently and naively. Like I think that's more often not the case.
Oh sure.
But, I appreciate that you did that because I kind of sprung that on you. But do you want to transition to? I know you had some notes on film that you wanted to sort of cover and tie it into the relationship that these people, whoever they are, the Dark Triad, whatever, have with each other.
Yeah, actually the films that I have collected kind of, they're some of my favorite films. And like I said, I'm not a contemporary film goer. I love film noir, 1940s. I love films probably stopping around the early 2000s. I just lost interest. But not to say, Inception is one of my favorite movies, and that was, I think, around 2009. So that's an exception. Inception, the movie with Leo DiCaprio. I loved it because of the different levels it went into in relation to our dreams, our fantasies, and the conflict of those with reality and the overlapping of those with reality and how one actually will control the other. And so Inception, I'm just putting that out there. But the films that I've compiled for this discussion kind of connect not so much to bloodline, but to art and life overlapping when it comes to occultism and crime, if that makes sense. For example, when I recently did a podcast with the Occult Rejects, we did a deep dive into assassinations, specifically an actress in Hollywood and John Lennon, and the connections to a book called The Catcher in the Rye, which I pretty much debunked the connection that book was said to have to the assassins of those crimes. But what I found interesting in the connections to movies, and I know people can go on forever about it. I've heard podcasts where people went at length described the relationship of movies, sometimes in predictive programming, sometimes as a way of forewarning the populace of what's really going on, because we are warned of what's going on. Things are basically in plain sight. We just need the right lens to look through. But the movie I was talking about in relation to the shooting of John Lennon, for example, was the movie Taxi Driver, which I think was 1976. The genre of movies in the 70s is so near and dear to me because they went into the trope of the anti-hero. You stopped having the good guy, bad guy. Good guy wins over bad guy. You started to have characters of shades of gray, and you started to have endings where the main guy did not succeed. The main character got murdered or bumped off or he failed. And that was when the 70s started to really turn around the genre of film, in my view. I mean, I'm not a film specialist by any means, but just from my own observation. So Taxi Driver was, I think, around 76. It was with Robert De Niro. He plays this disaffected cab driver. He's a little bit of an outlier, a little bit of a weird guy, and he just drives his cab and he makes observations about people. He's a very simple thinker, but he gets in his head that he wants to impress this girl who is working on a political campaign for somebody running for senator, I believe. And he gets obsessed with the idea of becoming an assassin. And he goes and he actually shaves his head into a mohawk. And this is going towards the end of the movie. He buys all these guns and he practices with these guns, and he feels powerful. He feels like somebody who can make a difference. He displays the warped type of thinking that type of an individual would be. Or we're supposed to think of an individual, an assassin, as being that, even though we know now that they're all manipulated and mind controlled. I mean, this is a different time and we weren't so aware of it. But in Taxi Driver, supposedly the movie, which was a Martin Scorsese film, the movie was the takeoff point for an actual assassination. It was the story of a man named Arthur Bremer. He's not a well-known assassin, but Arthur Bremer was a man who went into a crowd of people where Governor George Wallace was speaking. George Wallace was an extremely racist governor of Alabama at the time, or Georgia, I forget which, one of those two states. Extremely racist in the 1960s. And Arthur Bremer went and shot him, wanted to kill him, but he didn't succeed. George Wallace ended up paralyzed for the rest of his life in a wheelchair. And he underwent this transformation where he realized what an idiot he had been and what a narrow-minded person and bigot he had been. And I don't know how real that is, but he made a complete turnaround after he was shot. There was kind of this epiphany he had after he was shot. So anyway, Arthur Bremer conducted a failed assassination attempt. This movie is based on that experience. But what happens in the movie is you have Jodie Foster playing a young girl who is pimped out, a young runaway who is pimped out. Robert De Niro's character takes pity on her, and he goes back to her hotel and he kills the pimp and all these clients of hers. And he is later hailed as a hero for having done that. But anyway, you have Jodie Foster in the film, and Jodie Foster was the obsession of John Hinckley Jr., who also conducted a failed assassination attempt of President Ronald Reagan. So the movie's growing legs in reality because these things are being mirrored in real life after the movie came out. And Mark David Chapman, who was the confessed assassin of John Lennon, although in the podcast I did with the Rejects, I said I don't think he did it. I did a lot of research and I think it was just a fall guy. But anyway, Mark David Chapman supposedly took inspiration from Taxi Driver to shoot John Lennon. So you have one movie spawning all this cycle of assassinations and failed assassination attempts, which one was based on an assassination and two other assassinations were inspired by it. So there's this weird loop of either people getting ideas or ideas being put out into the ethers of this happening, and then it starts happening. You know what I mean? the impetus to do this took root in these individuals. Or so we thought, because I believe that assassins are mind controlled. I don't think they watch a movie and really think they're going to go do this. But this is what the culture put out there about it. So Taxi Driver, if people haven't seen it, it's a really, really good movie, really well acted movie. And I would recommend it. And I'm not getting paid to say any of this. I'm just talking about these movies. One, I think the seminal conspiracy theory movie was based on a novel in 1959 by Richard Condon called The Manchurian Candidate. And that, I think, was the seminal MK Ultra movie, the expose of brainwashing in the military that was so daring. It was so shocking and so daring. The movie didn't get released for 3 years. Frank Sinatra starred in it. He played an army sergeant who figured out that one of his compatriots had been brainwashed into conducting, again, an assassination of a high-ranking political figure. So Manchurian Candidate was remade, I think, around 2004 with Denzel Washington, but they changed it. They changed vital parts of it. I was really disappointed in the remake. The original explains how military during the Korean War, which is early 1950s, we discovered that Russians were, and also it was in Korea. So it was the communist influence in Korea at the time, which is where the war took place. They were brainwashing the military, getting them to commit assassinations, getting them to do things they would have never done if they were not under the influence of the MK Ultra. And I think that was when we took the impetus in this country to start using MK Ultra, and during and after World War II. We were so afraid of what the Russians were doing with it, which in a way is kind of a bullshit reason. We just wanted to do it ourselves. We weren't worried about the Russians. We just wanted a reason to do it ourselves. We always blame the enemy, the supposed enemy, on things that we want to do for ourselves anyway. It's like, well, we got to do it because they're doing it, and they're going to send a man into space, so we got to preempt that. We got to send a man into space first. It's all ego-driven stuff. But anyway, Manchurian Candidate was the soldier who was MK Ultra received it, and a bunch of soldiers received MK Ultra programming when they were prisoners of war in Korea. So then they come back here, and he is conditioned by getting different stimuli. The first stimuli is a telephone call asking him, Raymond, how about playing a game of solitaire? And that's the initial trigger. And then when he sees the card of the Queen of Diamonds, that sends him into full-blown following a command. So during the movie, Lawrence Harvey, who plays this poor soldier, gets phone calls, and then he'll start playing solitaire, and when the Queen of Diamonds shows up, he's triggered, and he's going to do whatever they tell him to do. He ends up killing several people in the movie, but Frank Sinatra's character catches him and exposes him and shows him what's been done to manipulate his mind. He gets a deck of cards. All of the cards are the Queen of Diamonds. It's a brilliant scene. It's a very intense scene where he says, Raymond, here, play a game of solitaire. And he starts laying the cards out, and every card is Queen of Diamonds. And the guy starts to go crazy because he's freaking out because there's so many stimuli in front of him. He's only used to seeing one card that triggers him. Now he's got a whole deck. So Frank Sinatra convinces him something's wrong, and the guy realizes something's wrong with his mind. So on the day that he's supposed to assassinate the political figure, he's up in a sniper's nest in an auditorium, and he's about to shoot the guy, but instead he goes and shoots the politician who would have benefited from the assassination, who happens to be his stepfather. I didn't want to go into too much detail. But at the end, he breaks the brainwashing, and he's so horrified at what he's done that he then shoots himself at the end of the movie. I know I'm doing a lot of spoiler alerts. If people want to watch the movie, it's still worth watching anyway. But,
it's a semi-film podcast, so spoilers will happen.
Yes, I couldn't explain it if I didn't say so. But anyway, that Manchurian Candidate was a brilliant film, and it really disturbed people. And I remember people saying, "Oh, it's just a movie. Oh, that was really creepy, though. That's really scary. That was just a movie, though. They wouldn't do that. Okay, well, we know better now. But then that was the early '60s, and then there was one movie that I was very fortunate. I used to go to the movies all the time, and a movie came out called in the early '80s. Now JFK was assassinated in 1963. This movie didn't come out until around 1980, called Executive Action. And I went to see it right away because I was always fascinated by the JFK assassination. I never believed it. Even being a young person, I didn't believe it, that it happened the way we were told. So I went to see Executive Action, and then it disappeared from sight. It was dropped from every theater. You could not get it on VHS. You could not find it. I must have been in the first group that saw the first distribution of it. And then it just disappeared. I was telling my friends about it, and they couldn't find it. It didn't exist. It did not come back out for maybe 20, 25 years. And it was on TV a few months ago. I had my sister watch it because I said, that's the movie that disappeared that nobody believed me when I told them that it had come out. Executive Action was based on a sort of like an imaginary group of men who plotted the destruction of President John F. Kennedy for all the reasons I believe that were valid, why it was done in real life. And they were all corporate heads and governors, political people, and military people. And it was just a movie on the planning of it, the execution of it, how they pre-planned it, how they staged doubles of Lee Harvey Oswald so that he would be recognized by witnesses, which was done, I believe. They used doubles in a lot of these incidents and catastrophic events. And so that one, Executive Action, came out again. Now it's like no big deal. You watch an Executive Action, it's like, so what? Yeah, we all know that there was something nefarious behind that assassination and that we were lied to and that Oswald was a patsy. But back then, it was still pretty shocking, and that's why the movie disappeared from sight. It was just banned. But they did bring it back to their credit. It was already old news. But that was one, Executive Action. And then there was one, oh God, this one I loved, from, I think, '74, 3 Days of the Condor. That was a very popular movie. And again, people's reaction was, oh, that's just, that's a lot of make-believe. Our government really wouldn't do that. 3 Days of the Condor was fascinating because it was about a group of intelligence agents who were working for the government, and they were just reviewing certain publications to locate patterns that they thought would connect to plots. Like, would they locate buzzwords? Would they locate themes that may be connected to plots related to actual events going on around the world? And what happened, Robert Redford plays the main character, and one day he goes out to buy lunch for his coworkers, and he comes back to the office and they've all been murdered. And he freaks out, he goes on the run, and he's trying to figure out why were they killed? What on earth was going on? And so he starts to talk to the higher ups of his own organization, who then set him up to be killed. What happened was the intelligence people, the researchers that he was working with, were so good at their jobs that they figured out a plot for an incident that our own government was responsible for carrying out. And that was something they could not live with. They all were killed as a result. And of course, now he's on the run and they're trying to kill him because he knows too much. They figured out too much from their work, from their research. So he's on the run, and he has these bizarre meetings with CIA people who are telling him, well, we do hire professional assassins. We do that. We have to protect what's going on. And your group just knew too much. And so it's weird because he's in their crosshairs, but he's talking to them at the same time. And at different points in the movie, they try to kill him and it doesn't work. And so at the end of the movie, he's still alive. He goes through all these different, I'm not going to reiterate all the things, but there's a lot of action. There's a lot of suspense. It's a really well done thriller. He's still alive at the end of the movie. He actually meets up with the assassin who killed his co-workers. And what happens is the assassin is at the house of one of the CIA team that he was working for, and the assassin kills the CIA guy. And Robert Redford is horrified. He said, "What did you just do?" And he said, "Look, I just work for whoever pays me. They paid me for the past job, but now somebody paid me for this job." And it's really scary. It's really horrifying to think, all the betrayal and the skullduggery that goes on, the back and forth and the backstabbing. So the assassin takes a liking to him and says, "Listen, if you don't want to do this kind of work, this is what you have to do to stay alive for the rest of your life." And so, because the assassin no longer is hired to kill Robert Redford, he leaves him alone. At the end of the movie, Robert Redford goes to the New York Times and reports everything that happened to him, thinking they're going to break the story. The CIA is going to get busted. We're going to have peace in the land again. We're going to get justice, except that one other head of the CIA who's talking to him is walking with him up the street. And Robert Redford says, "I just told the whole story to the New York Times. It's going to come out." And the CIA guy says, "How do you know? How do you know it's going to come out?" In other words, the New York Times and the mass media, they're all playing the same game.
100%.
They're all on different sides. So you can tell your story to the New York Times naively thinking it's going to expose the nefarious activities of the CIA when they're in bed with the CIA as well. So that was a really well done movie. I really recommend. I think you can get all of these on Amazon Prime for a couple of dollars. It is worth watching if you like conspiracy films and thrillers. And that was one of my favorites. All of these came about. All of these were mid-70s, except for Manchurian Candidate. The next one, which also scared me to death, was called The Parallax View, and that's basically again about corporate assassinations of political figures and how far into the media the corruption goes. And I don't want to go too much into that one. There's another one that came out with Gene Hackman, who's one of my favorite all-time actors, called The Domino Principle, which takes a different look at the use of prisoners, not just military, but prisoners to carry out targeted assassinations. And in this one, Gene Hackman is a guy who's in prison, and one of his cellmates suggests that, "Hey, maybe we could break out of here. I know a guy that might want to give you a job. You just have to help me break out of here." So they break out of the prison, and he meets up with corporate people, heads of corporations. And they said, "Well, we have a job for you, but we know you'd really like to see your wife, and you really need a vacation, and we're going to take care of that for you." So they bring him to Costa Rica, and he gets like $200,000 spending money, which was much more money then than it's worth now. It's still a lot now, but they just throw all these lavish benefits on him, and he's happy. He's like, "I'm out of jail. Things are going great. What's the job you have?" So he finds out the job they have is that he's supposed to kill a politician. And he's like, "Wait a minute, I don't think that's what I signed up for. I was already in jail for a murder that really wasn't something I did." And so it gets complicated, but he agrees to do it because by now they have his wife, they know where he lives, and he's kind of, they kind of got him by the, what. So he goes to he signs up for to do the assassination, but when the assassination takes place, he fires away from the intended victim, and he doesn't tell them that. But when he goes back after the assassination is carried out, the man is killed. He confronts them and says, "Listen, I didn't shoot that guy. That guy died." And they said, "Well, do you think you're the only person we hired? We had 2 other people at different posts, sniper posts. One of them was going to get the job done." And that threw a whole different light on JFK once again. You never have one person carrying out a hit, unless it's supposed to look like a lone nut. Even in the case of Oswald, there were snipers in different positions on that, on Dealey Plaza. There were people in the front of the limousine. There were people on the side. Oswald, I don't think even fired a gun. I don't even think he was in that at that window. But that movie called the Domino Principle, it's like dominoes. If you take one domino out, they're all going to fall. So what happens is all the guys involved in these plots by the end of the film are assassinated, including Gene Hackman himself. Everybody gets wiped out because they all know each other and they all know what the other did, and therefore the dominoes begin to fall. So that movie made a really good point, and I have heard that at great length how murderers who are in prison, and I know the names of one of them that was mentioned, Russell Williams, who was a lieutenant in the Canadian Air Force, who was in prison for life for murdering 2 women in the military, raping and murdering them. I heard that he was one such assassin where they take them out of prison surreptitiously and bring them on these jobs, these hit jobs. And so this movie, way back in the 70s, was telling us that that goes on. So very interesting how we are being informed. These going back, 70s, maybe 50, going on 50 years ago, they were trying to show that then when people couldn't believe it yet. It was right in our faces. They're telling us right in our faces, we do this. This is what happens. It's not make believe.
I think if I could impart anything on the already jaded conspiracy audience, I would say that you have to understand that it's happening, and you have to also understand that the engagement of the person pretending it doesn't happen actually benefits them, and it actually does a disservice to yourself, in my thinking, because you're not acknowledging reality for what it is. You're just acknowledging superficialities, the external contours, and it does nothing to deepen your greater understanding of what the great game really is. And make no mistake, I think that it is a game. And I do think there is benefit into us trying to push back the curtain and unveil a lot of the things that they are doing or have done. Would you agree with that, BD, that would serve us?
1,000% agree. Yes. I have had experience with people where the knee-jerk reaction was, I'd say something like, oh, that was an inside job, or I think that was a bunch of bullshit. I don't believe it. People, they wouldn't do that. People are so attached or needing to believe in things that over time and again with the cyclical history we have proven unreliable, have proven deceptive and dishonest. If they need to attach to that, they're just attaching to the wrong values. I mean, and I think it does threaten people if you don't have a strong enough inner fiber to accept these truths and not have it completely mess you up mentally. I know it does some people because it is disturbing.
Yes, it is.
But it's kind of like I have had that knee-jerk reaction from so many people, especially around 9/11. I was like, I think this was an inside job. Oh, no, we would never do that. Why wouldn't we? Look at the immediate benefit, the immediate impact of war in the Middle East, and we passed the Patriot Act. All these, indiscretions on our liberties and these inhibitions of our liberties, all because of the 9/11 catastrophic event. And people could not wrap their heads around it. And I was like, to me, it makes perfect sense. And yet, like I said, we're always swimming against the current sometimes with this. But people have got to start realizing, and then it challenges you. What do you really believe, and what do you hold dear as a belief? What and whom do you believe in? And that's what I think the fear is, more so than thinking our government's a bunch of corrupt criminals. It's challenging your own moral stand on things. Like I can think easily that it's an inside job. It doesn't threaten me as a person. A lot of people don't react that way. It crumbles their whole sense of belonging to a society, to a government, to a culture, to a nation, to think that goes on. And I think that's why we have to put it out there. So think about it, and then go back and think about yourself, because that's really what this compels you to do. Think about your own stand in society and in the world. And it's a painful thing, but I think that is where the enlightenment can come from, all this garbage and chaotic evil. I just think that people just don't want to take it that far in their thought process. But it could be tremendously empowering to think like that. Just people can't get past the fear, you know?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great place to thank you for all your time. Let's end on the clear pill. Conquer the fear. So important in Buddhism, so important in magic, so important in everything, really, because, you know, the fear is just perception, and you can cut through perception. But BD, thank you so much for doing this and for looking at Lana's chart. I know it was a special request, and you didn't have, obviously I would have been not upset if you didn't, but I really appreciate that you did and gave me a strong episode. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. Please plug your books, which I will include all your Amazon links. If you have a link tree, I'll make sure that it's all in there and everybody can check you out. And I know that people are gonna really hope you come back, so you have an open invitation. I don't really know anything about celebrities, but I guess other people are fascinated by them, so it makes good fodder.
Well, thank you for having me. I love coming on and talking with you. It's just great, and I'm happy to answer any questions people have. I'm glad and thrilled that people take an interest in my work, and I'm delighted to share it with whoever wants to share it with me.
Amazing. Everybody should follow you on Twitter. It's at Star Sleuth. Give BD a follow because a really incredible person, not the limited conversation we had, but just in the greater universe of interesting people. Thank you so much, BD.
Thank you for having me. Anytime. I'll come back anytime you ask me.
Hey, this is Jin the Ninja, and if you enjoyed the show, you can check out more episodes on Spotify and Anchor, and you can check me out on Twitter at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn, and on Instagram at Threshold Saints. And there's a link tree in the show notes, so you can check out all my appearances and my shows to date.
Vegeta, thanks.
For what? I should be thanking you, Kakarot.
Nah, what do you mean? I loved every minute. Goodbye, my friend.